I'm pumped to say hello as Clippers, Paul and Kawhi. Come on! Come on! Come on, get up if you're psyched as I am! Get up! We're only here for one reason. We want to win it all.
This Clippers team, I am telling you right now, will win a championship, and I believe that will happen this year.
But right now, I think the Clippers are the best team in the league.
That's why the Clippers are my choice to make it to the NBA Finals out of the West.
Kawhi Leonard, Kawhi Leonard.
It's all about the Larry O.B.
Before we get into the video, I have exciting news. I've partnered with Autograph to give away free playoff tickets to the Eastern or Western Conference Finals. Winner chooses. All you have to do is download the app using the link in the description, enter code Hardwood upon installation, and that's it. I'll also be uploading exclusive game-by-game recaps throughout the NBA playoffs on the app, so look out for that. Shout out to Autograph for partnering with us for this giveaway. Autograph is the first app to recognize and reward fans, turning their passion into access and experience. So download it now using code Hardwood. I'll see you over there. The Los Angeles Clippers have quite possibly the most depressing history of any franchise in the NBA. Even with 6 straight playoff appearances for the Lob City Clippers in the 2010s, the franchise had made just 14 playoff appearances in 49 seasons, including a 15-year playoff drought that spanned the entire decade of the 1980s, and just 1 playoff appearance in the 2000s. This franchise has been through a ton, even though they moved to the big market of Los Angeles in 1985. So that's why when Steve Ballmer purchased the team in 2014, and they signed Kawhi Leonard in the summer of 2019, Clippers fans had a ton of hope that this franchise was headed in the right direction. Only a few weeks later, when it was announced they would be trading for superstar Oklahoma City forward Paul George, it became even more clear the Los Angeles Clippers were turning a new leaf and would be a contender for years to come. I mean, just think about it. Kawhi Leonard was just off a mercenary season in Toronto where he won them an NBA championship, and now pairing him with Paul George, arguably the best teammate he has ever had since entering his own prime. Not to mention, Ballmer also announced in that same summer renderings for a proposed new arena for the Clippers. Things were looking up, and no longer would they be considered the little brother of Los Angeles. But as we fast forward an entire 5 seasons later, it looks entirely bleak for this same Clippers team. We'll go through each individual playoff season on its own and explain what happened, but they are left with 1 conference finals appearance, 2 first-round exits, and a year where they missed the playoffs completely, which if you were to tell Clippers fans this when they signed Kawhi Leonard and traded for Paul George in the summer of 2019, heck, if you told owner Steve Ballmer that this would be the results back then, they would be greatly disappointed. And now here they are in the 2024 offseason after getting bounced by Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks in 6 games, with an aging roster ailed by injuries, and without the rights to their own first-round pick until 2030. Let's dive into what went wrong for this supposed super team and what I think they can do going into this offseason to salvage whatever hope they may have left. Let's start all the way back in the summer of 2019 when Kawhi Leonard announced he was going to be signing with the Clippers. It shocked almost everybody. The Lakers were heavy favorites. Some even thought he would return to Toronto where he had just won his 2nd NBA championship. But it was the Clippers that won the grand prize of the 2019 offseason. And it wasn't like this roster was a bad one to start with. They had won 48 games in the 2019 season. And although they lost Tobias Harris to free agency, they had some key pieces of last year's team coming back in Marcus Morris, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, Patrick Beverley, Landry Shamet, and Ivica Zubac. But it was the corresponding move that happened right after Kawhi was signed that shocked everyone. Paul George, forward from the Oklahoma City Thunder, a guy who had just said previously Oklahoma City is home, would get traded to the Los Angeles Clippers In return, the Thunder would acquire Danilo Gallinari, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and 5 first-round picks. Looking back on this trade now, we understand this could go down as one of the worst trades in NBA history, given that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just finished second in MVP voting and route to Oklahoma City's #1 seed in the West this year. And this would kick off a complete rebuild for the Thunder and is a huge reason they are in the position they are today. Although he was considered a good young piece at the time, nobody could have imagined the player that SGA was going to turn into. And everyone was focused on the super team that the Los Angeles Clippers had just built overnight. This was something Kawhi pretty much forced the Clippers to do, as his crosstown rivals had both LeBron James and Anthony Davis. He had a desire to play with a superstar. This began the official contending for a championship era for the Los Angeles Clippers. And for all the super teams that had been built in the NBA over the last decade, this was the first one that included a player coming off his own championship. So Clippers fans had completely reasonable hope that they would be able to win a championship, if not at least enter an NBA Finals, something this franchise has never done. Matter of fact, up until this point, the Los Angeles Clippers had never even made a conference finals, which is kind of hard to believe considering Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, DeAndre Jordan, and the Lob City Clippers. But those teams were never able to get out of the conference semis, and this Clippers team would be different. In the first regular season of this experiment, the Clippers would finish well, going 49-23, finishing second in the Western Conference. Even though Paul George only played 48 games, Kawhi only played 57. They'd be fully healthy for the NBA playoffs in the bubble. In their first round series, they would defeat a young Luka Doncic Dallas Mavericks team in 6 games. And Kawhi absolutely dominated this series, averaging 32.8 points per game and 10 rebounds, shooting a 57.7 effective field goal percentage. Yep, Kawhi was still that dude. And in the conference semis, they would match up against the 3rd seeded Denver Nuggets, led by a young Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. And Los Angeles would go up 3-1 in this series with a Game 4 win, 96-85. But then in Game 5, Denver would come back from a 12-point halftime deficit and beat the Clippers, making it 3-2. In Game 6, the Clippers would have a 16-point lead at halftime. Yet in the second half, they would get blown out by 29 points and lose by 13. And in Game 7, again with a 2-point lead at halftime, they would end up losing by 15. The Denver Nuggets came back from 3-1 to defeat the NBA's newest and hottest super team in the bubble. And in year 1 of this experiment, the Clippers would lose in the Western Conference semis. But on the bright side, Kawhi Leonard was just 28 years old, and he played incredible in this series, averaging 28 points, 9.3 rebounds, 5.5 assists, 2.3 steals, only 2.5 turnovers, and he shot it well from the field at 53.4 effective field goal percentage. Paul George, on the other hand, had a rough series. He only shot 39.8% from the field, but he's also just 29 years old. You have these guys locked up for years to come. Yes, it sucks to blow a 3-1 lead in the Western Conference semis, but you have a couple more years of this window. In the 2020-2021 season, the Clippers would pick up right back where they left off, finishing 47-29, 4th in the Western Conference. After defeating Luka again in the first round in 7 games, they would come back down 2-0 versus the Utah Jazz in the Western Conference semis. This was a series that everyone says Rudy Gobert got exposed, including getting postered by Terrence Mann. But to be honest, this Utah Jazz team had almost zero perimeter defense, and Rudy was being asked to do a ton. I think Rudy's proved in this year's playoffs with a proper perimeter defense, he is an elite defender. After evening the series in Game 4, 2-2, Kawhi Leonard would not play in Games 5 or 6, and the Clippers would still beat the #1 seed Jazz, winning in 6 games the entire series and advancing to their first ever conference finals in franchise history. But it was bittersweet because it was announced that Kawhi Leonard would miss the rest of the playoffs with a torn ACL. Clippers fought hard in that Western Conference Finals versus the Phoenix Suns, but they just did not have enough, would lose in 6 games. Reggie Jackson had a good series, averaging 20 points. Paul George averaged 28.7 and 10.5 alongside 5.5 assists. But as a Clippers fan, again, you had hope. Kawhi Leonard had gotten injured. Your team had still beaten the #1 seed in the Utah Jazz, and without Kawhi, had taken the Phoenix Suns to 6 games. Next year may be a lost cause with Kawhi's yell, but he's still just 30 years old. You will have the 2022-2023 season to finally win that championship you've been searching for since the summer of 2019. After missing the playoffs in that 2022 season, Kawhi was back for the 2023 season. They would finish 44-38, 5th in the Western Conference. Kawhi wasn't necessarily scoring as much, but he was still getting back into the groove from that torn ACL. The Clippers would get Russell Westbrook in the buyout market in February, and Norman Powell was a super important piece for them off the bench, averaging 17 points per game. They'd match up versus the newly formed super team, the Phoenix Suns, with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. And this really was the battle of modern day super teams, with the Clippers winning game 1 on the back of Kawhi Leonard's 38 points, 115-110. They would lose game 2, 123-109, but that was okay because they stole home court, splitting the first 2 games. But in devastating news, it was announced after game 2 that Kawhi Leonard was day-to-day with a knee injury that he suffered in game 2 of that series, and he wouldn't play the rest of the series, and the Clippers would lose this series in 5 games. It was revealed afterwards that Kawhi had a torn meniscus in that knee, the same knee he tore his ACL in. This was again another playoffs where Clippers fans really felt like they had a chance to make the NBA Finals, but Kawhi just could not stay healthy. At this point in the Clippers super team experiment, times were getting desperate. Kawhi Leonard was about to turn 32 years old, and Paul George was about to turn 33. Next season had to be the year. And that brings us to this year. The Clippers would finish 51-31. They made a massive trade for James Harden right before the season started, that after the first month of working out some kinks, started to work out marvelously for them, basically giving up the remaining draft capital they had in their 2028 unprotected first round pick, 2 seconds, a 2029 pick swap, and an additional pick they had from the Oklahoma City Thunder, completely emptying the war chest. This was the season for them. At this point, they wouldn't own their own first round pick from now until 2030. They do have in every odd year a least favorable pick swap. They were as all in as ever, and by the time January came around, it looked like it was working to a T. Matter of fact, they would overtake the Timberwolves for the 1 seed on February 6th with a record of 34-15. Just 2 months earlier, on December 6th, they were just 10-10, meaning they had gone 24-5 over that 2-month span. But for the rest of the season, they would go just 500 and slot in at the 4 seed, which was okay because at least they had home court advantage for the first round, matching up for the 3rd time in 6 seasons with the Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic. If you're watching this video, you probably know what happened in this series. It only took place a few weeks ago. The Clippers win game 1 without Kawhi. He plays game 2 and somewhat of game 3, but does not look like himself, dealing with right knee inflammation, is out the rest of the series, and the Clippers lose in 6 games, which brings us to where we are now. What do the Los Angeles Clippers do after 5 seasons of this super team experiment and just 1 conference finals without Kawhi Leonard in that series to show for it? The answer I have is I do not know, for multiple reasons. Number 1, they don't have any draft capital. They can't really rebuild without draft capital, or else you're just allowing other teams to profit off of your high first round pick you do not own. And the Clippers don't own their own until 2030, but it's not just that. They're also unveiling their new stadium next season, and the last thing you want, especially in a market like LA, is a team that is rebuilding going into a new stadium. This is a big deal for Steve Ballmer and the ownership of the Los Angeles Clippers. They can't afford to go into a 3 to 5 year rebuild during this unveiling. But it gets even more confusing than that, because then you have the Kawhi Leonard saga of just not being healthy in almost every single playoff appearance he's had over the last 4 seasons. Don't get me wrong, Kawhi Leonard is one of the greatest players of this generation. He's a Hall of Famer, and when he's been healthy, he has performed incredibly for the Clippers in the playoffs. The problem is he hasn't had a healthy playoff series since 2020, and now he is going to turn 33 next year. But then you also have Paul George, who is 33, and in my opinion, does not look like the old Paul George. It looks like he's losing his athleticism ever so slightly. In all 6 games in this year's playoffs, Paul averaged just 19.5 points per game. That is absolutely not going to cut it for a player that's supposed to be the 1B superstar in this core, especially when Kawhi was out. They have a big decision they have to make on Paul because he has a player option for the end of next season, and he's going to make $49 million next year. And then you have James Harden, who is not under contract for next season. Do you re-sign him? Do you let him walk? I think you have to re-sign him. You traded your remaining draft capital for him. I think James Harden was the best player on the Clippers this year in the playoffs, but he's also 34 years old as well. I'm not really sure how they get better on the edges with this roster either. Zubats has been awesome. He's only 26 years old. He's signed through 2025. Norman Powell is 30. He's a good piece off the bench for them, who's signed through 2026. I think Amir Coffey and Kobe Brown have continual room for growth over the next year or so, but the Clippers have put themselves in almost an impossible position where they have no way to move forward except to keep trying to win. And I think we can learn a lesson from the Clippers and the Suns. Do not trade picks or pick swaps that are 6 to 7 years out unless you have superstars that are 23 and 24 years old. Who knows when Paul George is going to completely fall off? Who knows if they sign James Harden when he's going to completely fall off? Who knows if Kawhi Leonard will ever have a fully healthy playoff run again? Personally, here's what I think I would do if I was the Clippers GM. I think you trade Paul George to a team like the Utah Jazz. Danny Ainge has said he wants to go star shopping this offseason. I'm not sure if Utah would take the bait on a 33-year-old aging superstar, but at the same time, they have the draft capital. Maybe you can recoup a little bit of that and get a little younger. Stick with Kawhi, re-sign James Harden, and stay competitive. But similar to Phoenix, I guarantee you they're just going to run it back. Matter of fact, there was a rumor on Hoop Rumors a couple days ago saying from Lawrence Frank, the Clippers team president, that they're going to try to re-sign Paul George and that they hope to have the same core group back next year to produce a better playoff run. Matter of fact, Frank actually was quoted saying this: "I understand the skepticism of, hey, this is another year where you haven't had the group whole, but I would guard against the cynicism. Just because it's happened 4 straight seasons doesn't mean it's always going to happen next year." But like we said, they don't really have any other choice. I hope this can be a lesson to other teams in the NBA. This is what happens when you mortgage your future and go all in on winning a championship. I actually understand what teams like the Cavaliers and the Wolves did when they traded for their superstars, Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. They had younger pieces around them, and although they gave up 4 to 5 first-round picks, they didn't completely empty their draft arsenal for the rest of the decade. By the year 2027, I think it's going to be a very interesting case study in NBA history to see where teams like the Clippers, the Bucks even, and the Phoenix Suns end up. My worry is that these teams completely lose all of their talent due to these players getting super old, and they still don't have their picks for another 2 to 3 seasons. It's going to be pretty dark in my opinion, especially for a franchise that has already been through so much. I've said this in multiple videos now, but I'm going to continue banging the drum. The scariest part about being a Clipper or a Suns fan over the next 3 to 4 years is that while your teams are holding on hope and declining, the rest of the Western Conference is only getting better. Look at the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're young. They have tons of picks. They're only going to get better from here, even though they're the 1 seed this year. Look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are probably the favorites to win the title as of now. And of course, the Denver Nuggets, the Dallas Mavericks with Luka, and even teams like the Memphis Grizzlies, the Houston Rockets, the Utah Jazz with that draft arsenal they have. The West is only getting better, and you are probably only getting worse as time goes on. That does it for this video. If you enjoy videos like this, consider subscribing. I appreciate all of the support. Remember, we are doing this giveaway for an Eastern Conference or Western Conference Finals tickets via Autograph. Download the app in the description. Thank you guys so much. If you enjoyed this video, check out the video I made on the Phoenix Suns as well. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you on the hardwood.